It's an honor to be asked to be a speaker for TEDx at SelfDesignHigh. And the topic, the theme today is co-creating the future. And when I think of that, I think, well, that's perfect. That's everything I want to talk about. It's everything I believe in. Because the word co-creating involves cooperation, which means together, to move together. And I have to first acknowledge the fact that this talk is not mine alone. I moved together with our lovely students. Bara Haladik and Eli Zibin came and worked with me for 3 weeks, and we ran through what worked, what didn't. They told me what was inspiring to them, what wasn't, and it actually co-created this talk. So they're a part of this talk, as I am too. And creation is the root word of create, is to go deep into moving forward, as artists do. So co-creating the future is working together with others and moving deep into the future. And what does that mean for education? How do we co-create the future of education? And I would say that I've been really inspired by the work of Otto Scharmer, who takes the idea of reaching out into the future and pulling it back to the present, and recognizing that it's actually, the future is now, that we create the seeds of imagination, inspiration. We create the seeds of what will be with who we are, how we stand, and what we believe in now. And we look at the ideals of our society. So if you're going to understand the future, I would say I began to look at, well, what was held in the past? We are somebody else's future. So I looked into the Greek ideals of society and education, and what did they believe was important to their society, and how. And when you look back at the Greeks, most of us think of the Greek Olympics. We think of what stood behind the gymnasium, behind the harmony, the view that the human being itself was divine, and that the human being in itself is based in harmony. And we are that crystal ball that's constantly moving in the gymnastic kind of a way. And harmony was also considered to be living in music. And Plato actually said that music was the basis of a good state, and a state would only be as good as the music it represented. And it was up to the nobility, it was mandatory actually for the nobility to study music up until the age of 30 in Greece. So you have to say, well, those are the ideals of Greece. How did they metamorphose into today? So we went from, in the Western world, Western consciousness, we went from Greek consciousness to Roman consciousness, where the art of rhetoric, the TEDxTalks, would have been greatly admired in Rome. And the art of rhetoric, where you persuade through argument whatever you are convinced of. And that, again, created great debate and the political system which we currently use today. So there's part of the past living in our present today, which was, again, their future. And then we move through, in the Western world at least, it's, to the consciousness of the medieval life, the Middle Ages. The time of Newton, the time of Darwin, the time of the Renaissance, leading into the Middle Ages, or the Middle Ages leading into the Renaissance, I should say. And we looked at the art of rhetoric going into to profess, right? So the professor was born. Arab universities, so the first one was started by Harid al-Rashid in Spain. So universities began to become prevalent, and people began to look at teaching and learning and education in a way that created the professors standing and speaking to everyone else to profess their knowledge. And knowledge in that time, and I consider today, equals power. So if knowledge equals power, at the time when the Darwinian evolutionary theory started happening, which was by no means limited, but it professed that the survival of the fittest wins. So I began to look at, well, what does that mean today in education? if we were to look at what is survival of the fittest in education, I think that our grade system and the fact that we measure intelligence based on a grade system in some school systems as a measure of our intelligence, our integrity, and in a way, our societal ideals. And I began to really question all of this a number of years ago as a teacher, and started looking into what other people were saying about present-day education and whether or not the past ideals needed a sort of shot in the arm. And I came across the work of Parker Palmer. Is this not working? Right. So Parker Palmer is a college professor in the Eastern United States, and he has come up with a few theories of his own. He began to take a look at our current professor situation from university, the highest levels of university, to kindergarten, really, where the A in the middle is the authority figure, the teacher, the professor. And all of the little a's are the amateurs, the students. And that is currently a model that's still being exhibited today. And he began to question that, and he began to look at, well, what would happen if we took the authority of the professor at top and put it in the center, put him on the bottom in a way, and put the subject as the center of our learning? Because then we all become knowers, or we all become authorities on the subject, as mentioned earlier today. We are all knowers of whatever the subject is, and then we can participate with what we know and bring and develop, and then we inform the greater subject, and it becomes holistic. The teacher is now the facilitator. And some teachers that I've talked to really stand behind the idea that authority is necessary, because it means that what we stand as a human being is, in a way, an example to children, students and children. And I argue that actually authority doesn't always have to be the way it looked in the past. Authority can be based on authenticity. It can be based on making mistakes and being nervous. It can be based on what makes us come alive. Because what makes us come alive is the most important thing that our future, as well as our present, really needs, especially in the classroom, but in our lives. So I began to realize that everything depends on the relationship between the teacher and the student. In a way, it's like a lemniscate, which is an ancient symbol of eternity or universality. And that lemniscate weaves back and forth between the teacher. And when you're teaching in a classroom, instead of being fortunate enough in one way to teach out of your living room, but when you're teaching in a classroom with a large group of children in front of you, or youth, whatever age group they are, you're in a way put on a spot because they are all looking at you, and you need to look at them as the subject rather than the subject that you're teaching. And that I found is the most important thing that could be possible, because there's an interplay between teaching and learning. There's an interplay between listening and speaking. And the nodal point, the crossing point, right in the center there, right there, that's the unknown. That's the mystery place. That is what you don't know yet. And as teachers, mentors and teachers, I feel I might have something to say about a particular subject that I want my students to know about. But unless I know what I don't know about it, I don't know anything, right? And that nodal point is where I can be informed by the students. And I've found that that often comes through questions. It's through student inquiry. And let's see, got to try to figure this out here. So I began to look and play. At the time I was teaching in Toronto, and I had a group of 6th grades, I think 28 students in Toronto. And I began to play entirely. I threw everything out the door except for student inquiry and student questions. And I gave the subject to them. And what you see in this picture is every hand raised. I had a student teacher at the time who asked a question. The entire class was live and humming with energy and vitality and interest in full student engagement. And so I began to really get excited about this and look at, well, if that's true, what else do I need to stand in the back of instead of in the front of. I call it teaching from the back of the classroom, when you're in a situation that you are teaching in a full classroom. And so I began to teach from the back of the classroom by giving the kids control, in a way, of whatever they wanted to do, giving them the subject as the center. And you can see in this photograph that the kids are all very busy. Some of them are making maps, some of them are writing in a journal, some of them are in the library, some of them are doing other things, and they're all working on a common theme that they've chosen. Well, they didn't want to end. I had parents call me and say, well, they don't want to stop. They're constantly learning. And you know, we just wanted to take them away for the weekend, but they want to go to the library. So I make a practice of saying, when I'm teaching in a classroom and informally, to shake the hands of the students that I work with. So I look them in the eye, and it's a Waldorf practice actually, and shake their hand in the morning. And our morning lineup turned into a 45-minute long lineup, because every single student had something they had to tell me about what they've learned about their subject and their choice. And it just went on and on. So the only problem I found with this was that I needed more time, one-on-one time with the students. So I began to develop a theory for my graduate degree that was centered with something I called leaving room for the students. And I used this symbol by Georg Kulevind, who is a contemporary philosopher, and he talked about the finished as being a circle, the finished world. In a way, the world of minerals, plants, and animals, the finished, the things that aren't evolving but continuing to maintain themselves, the finite. And I thought, in the classroom, we can't work with finished knowledge. You can get that off the internet. Knowledge is not what we're looking for. We're looking for something to reach into the future with. We're looking for how to deepen the capacity to imagine a future full of hope, full of inspiration, and full of things, as mentioned earlier, that hasn't been done or seen yet. So Georg Kulevind worked with this idea of the human being as unfinished, that we as human beings aren't finished yet. We're unfinished. We're entering into more of a finite world, but we have to remain unfinished, and we are unfinished. We're continuing to evolve our consciousness. We're continuing to evolve our capacity of heart. We're continuing to evolve our capacity for empathy, to meet and give a jacket to the homeless, or to give away all our things and put it in our car or on our feet and head off into the unknown. It's hopefully becoming more and more a practice. To have the courage to trust in the future, to believe that we are taken care of. And I think that really has to happen in the classroom situation. So we look with the unfinished lesson, we leave room for the students, we end up with something like this, where the subject is in the center. Now, everything is based on participation, so give me a subject, any subject. Math, great. Okay, put math in the center where the Fibonacci spiral is. All right. How does math relate to language? Any ideas? Rules. There are rules to language. So we have a structure that is a geometry, let's say geometry of language, which is a form of math, right? There's a structure to the paragraph. There's a structure to a sentence. There's a structure to grammar. There's structure to poetry. You can look at what a haiku is, 5 words. And thank you. Okay. So when we work with, excuse me, I got to put this on, I think. I'm not sure how to do it. So we have to look at the structure of math in language. How does math relate to science? Physics. Thank you. So math in physics, we're looking at the elements of gravity. We're looking at formulas, a series of different formulas. That's where algebra can come in, right? Math in chemistry. I'm a potter. I make glazes. I teach high school pottery, high school glaze chemistry. And my students actually constantly make their own chemistry experiments. And I had 2 of my grade 12 boys say, "Oh my God, this is chemistry. This is so exciting. Look what happens. This isn't just glazing, this is chemistry." I went, "Yes, and it's also geology. Look at the geology of what you're putting together. Now, cook that one up till 2300, 2350 degrees Fahrenheit, and we'll see what happens under the fire. Let's let it melt. Let's let it move." And so math is related to science. How is math related to movement? Rhythm, perfect. Wonderful. How is math related to music? Same, timing, movement. Math is related to everything. So what we're looking at, when you put the subject in the center, you see that it's exponential. Math can be related to anything. Now take math out of that center and put in something else. What could it be? Biology. So we have science of biology, we have the language of biology, right? We have the art of biology. Look at what artists do. Look at where their inspirations come from. We have the science of biology. And then there's the social aspect. Okay, how does social aspect go in with that? And so on. So you began to look at the subject-centered classroom, and then I began to say, oh, you have to play. You actually have to make it come alive. Now Schiller, basically in the art and the aesthetic education of man, said we are most human when we play. So if the Greeks, the Romans, and the society of the past began to look at what are the ideals of society, I would say, why not make our age one of play? Why don't we break free of the iron bounds that bind us to say who we are and what we need to do to see and feel that we're successful and intelligent and creative? And why don't we play a little bit more? So play asks us to be spontaneous and present, artistic, enthusiastic, and curious. And there is a level of the unknown that always has to happen. We enter into uncertainty. We have to trust. Rollo May in The Courage to Create, and written in 1965, I think it was, said artists are always playing and they have to be comfortable with the element of uncertainty. Now, I don't know about you, but it's not a comfortable place to be, this level of uncertainty with your life. It's darn uncomfortable. But to actually have the courage to go forward anyway is what we need in every classroom today. To say, how do we play with those, with learning? How do we play with mentoring? How do we play with what we think we know? How do we turn it on its head? I think I'll close with the fact that we have to become artists, all of us in our lives, and we basically work with the idea of what the present moment brings to us. Annie Dillard has a line that she said, "How can we doubt our own time in which each bright instant probes the future?" So when we bring trust and play and imagination into the mix, learning and teaching become joy. And that reminds, Walt Whitman actually then said, was a master at doing that and playing with language and playing with the idea that we enter into the mystery. And here in this mystery of teaching and learning, we stand. Thank you.